Right, another conversation is just about to unfold right here, and this is a big one, especially when it comes to the buzzword today. We are talking about sustainability, but we're taking this conversation a notch higher, and we're talking about sustainability reporting. And who best to help us to make sense of this conversation other than the incoming Chief Executive Officer at Nairobi Securities Exchange, Frank Mwiti. Thank you so much for making time and for speaking to us right here. In your opening remarks, you did mention three very, very powerful points, and I want us to build up on them. That one, every chief executive officer agrees that societal and environmental change has an impact on their businesses. Secondly, you mentioned that over 90% globally are now reporting on sustainability. And then lastly, you said more than 50% of Africa's GDP is exposed to climate change, yet we receive less than or about 3% of financing either for sustainability or for mitigation. And I want us to build this conversation around just those 3 points. If we indeed are seeing the significance of sustainability, do you feel that there is a general overview across the board about what will be needed to rescue our institutions, to lead them to the direction of sustainability, or we are just it's just a buzzword for you when you talk about sustainability and reporting? Let's start from there.
Thanks, Anangwe. Look, I think the first thing to say is Africa is actually receiving the blunt end of matter sustainability. Whether you're thinking climate change, whether you're talking about aspects of financial inclusion that are actually part and parcel of sustainable finance in the bigger picture, as well as matters, for example, around carbon financing. And there is a school of thought that says perhaps Africa should just exploit the resources it has, whether they are clean or not, and clean up later. After all, other jurisdictions did that.
We'll come to prove that and just see whether the pros and cons of that.
Yes. Now, I'm not saying that's my
we
school
should
of
do.
thought.
Oh, okay.
I'm just
good to
saying
clarify that.
There is a certain school of thought that thinks along those lines. Now, there are two things here. The first thing is the issues we're trying to solve as far as sustainability is concerned, sustainable development, they are too big for any single country to solve. I think climate change, for example. Okay, these are gigantic issues that can't be solved by any single entity. So we have to collaborate. The way forward is collaboration. Right. Okay, and some of the issues that we need to resolve need to be supported by multiple partners. So, for example, for Africa, if we have to say, look, we need to conserve our forests, we need to not exploit our fossil resources, then it means the world at large should also work with us to support our sustainable development, so that we don't go down the route of, creating even more issues for future generations. As far as sustainability reporting is concerned, it goes without saying that unless there is transparency and clarity around sustainability reporting, Africa is unlikely to attract more investments and more capital to solve the issues that we need to solve.
Because we will not report in the right way.
Correct, exactly. So it is both necessary that we report correctly, timely, accurately, but at the same time as well, we need to be saying what part of this reporting is more relevant for Africa compared to maybe other jurisdictions, and how do we actually localize some of these reporting requirements, given the issues that the very unique issues that we are actually trying to solve, and the complexities of solving them within our context.
Mwiti, you've really just given me a whole load of content to now start dissecting, and I want us to start off from the aspect of even the overall understanding of the whole sustainability and reporting aspect, because just the other day is when now ESG became something that is mandatory for listed institutions to do it. In the past, it was CSR, we are doing this to support here and there and there and there. So it's still a fairly new thing to organizations, and now even more newer to even the consumers of this information that is coming out. What is happening within the spheres of those who are responsible for ensuring that the right reporting is being done, and also there's a true reflection of that reporting?
Okay. You know what? It's actually fairly easy to break it down so that just about everyone can understand what we are trying to do, and more importantly, be able to actually see why sustainable reporting matters and how we should actually do it. The first thing is to start with, what is sustainable development? What is it? And what
the definition?
Yes, what definition can we all agree on? Because if we agree on it, it's much easier to talk about reporting. The sustainable development, the definition for sustainable development that I think the bulk of us, the majority of us will agree with is this, that listen, the current generation needs to develop within its means and do so without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Okay, so if we agree that listen, we need to meet our needs now, but we should not do it at the expense
of the future generations. Yes.
Once we say that's definition is agreeable, it follows fairly easily that listen, we then need to agree how we measure what we are doing now is not compromising
the future generations. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it starts with what are we doing around environment? What are we doing around society? What are we doing about our people? You know, so societal people, things
and governance.
And then we say the way to measure that is to agree what standards we use to measure. Hence this point about we need to agree on those standards. Currently they are a bit fragmented, but the point is there is consensus coming around globally around how we need to measure that what we are doing now is not going to mess up
the future.
Right. And once we agree on those standards, and you know, as much as they are fragmented, they are fairly, the ones that are there are fairly well put together. Now we get into the next phase, which is measuring. Okay. Now the issue is this: we need to measure in a transparent way. Okay, because otherwise you'll have these things like, for example, greenwash. You know, people will tidy over things and just say, you know, measure what they want to measure and, you know, do other funny business.
Set the exam and set the marking scheme for themselves.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that needs objective, you know, an objective way of measuring that or validating it using third parties, for example, to verify the data and things like this. Currently, the challenge is not just agreeing on standards; it's actually confirming that we are aligned with the standards, that the things we report, the sustainability reports that come out are in fact true, they are accurate, they are fair, and more importantly, they are measuring the right things. So I'm simply saying we agree on what sustainable development is the way to go.
Then set the standards.
There's the standards.
Then
start now
the
measuring
reporting
and
measuring.
reporting on it.
Right.
Okay. In fact, in my view, that's where the challenge is. It's real. The standards, it's an issue of improving them. They are okay. The definition, I think we are settled on that. It's now measuring and reporting. And where we find issues, how do we remediate them?
Right. And if you're saying that is the case, what then do we do? Because I've already seen some institutions already starting to report.
Yes.
And as opposed to just their quarterly financial reporting, they're now even doing their ESG reporting on what they've been able to do and what they're setting out to achieve. If we are still not in agreement or you know, aligned on how do we prove that this is actually what is on the ground, then what are they reporting then?
No, it's probably not as bad as you put it. Let's put it this way. There's well-established standards to measure financial metrics. You agree?
Correct.
You know, I think that's very well established. You know, IFRS, GAAP, and all these other sort of things. So that's okay. Okay. Now, what most people around the world are doing is to say, we know how to measure financial metrics. These are the points relating to matters, environment, social governance, you know, the ESG type metrics. We want them to have similar quality. Okay? So we are going to build on how we measure financial metrics, but give it a certain overlay of ESG related metrics. Okay? So to the extent that we are saying we are building on top of what used to be called single materiality to now what's called double materiality. Now we are talking about ESG over and above financial
reporting. Yes.
I am very optimistic that actually we'll get there. So it's not very bad. I think the issue, just to close the point, Anangwe, the issue is this: that reporting. Okay, what you can't measure, you can report.
You cannot report.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the issue right now is actually figuring out what do we want to measure. If I tell you measure impact, you can come up with 10, 50, 10, 16 definitions. Okay. What are we measuring? Yeah. How do we measure it? And now then the mechanics of reporting emanate from there.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm optimistic.
You're optimistic. I love your level of optimism, Mwiti. But then, who needs to come to the table to offer the support on alignment, or where are we at? Okay. And also trying to plug in the role of public accountants, the body of public accountants. Yeah. Where do they come in, especially in ensuring that you promised that you will reduce your carbon footprint by this as part of your ESG strategy, and then you're saying you have done this. The auditing institutions, I mean, how aligned are they today as we speak in your own assessments?
Okay. I want to take you back to the point you made around whether there's alignment on measuring. The first thing to say is accountants have a role, but they are not the only ones. Okay? It's a whole ecosystem. After all, we are dealing with planetary issues.
Correct.
Okay? The role for accountants, for me, in my view, is a lot more clear and defined compared to others. Okay. Why? Because to start off with, the custodian of financial metrics, reporting around financial metrics, sits with accountants by and large. Yes. However, now that we are talking about measuring other types of values, okay, or value in whether it's an organization or something like this, then automatically it means accountants have a role, but they are not the only one. So you now have to start thinking of policy. You have to talk about other verifiers. For example, entities that verify carbon credits. These are not necessarily accounting firms. Okay, you have to say, in developing standards, we need to come together with different disciplines and professionals to measure, to come up with metrics that resonate with just about everybody. Okay, so for example, matters to do with emissions. It's a very technical subject.
Correct.
That requires a whole sort of different type of discipline. By the time an accountant gets their head around it, I think we can agree that's a tail end of the process.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm saying accountants have a role, a very big role. We can talk a bit more about that. Policy makers and regulators, for sure. Other technical players, for example. The example I can think of would be, let's say, entities that are involved in environmental science, for example. What I'm trying to get at is the role for accountants is, of course, is very important.
Yeah.
They have a very well developed history of measuring things.
Yeah.
I think they can be leaders in this discussion, but it has to be an integrated ecosystem of different people around
different players have to be on the table.
Yes.
Mwiti, I want to let you go, but before I do that, we'll talk a bit about the financing, which you pointed out. It's 3% or thereabout.
Yes.
For mitigation and sustainability.
Yeah.
But we cannot continue sitting on a corner and crying as Africa.
True.
What creative financing models do you think as a continent we need to start adapting? I know of the sustainability linked bonds that various institutions have started to put out, green bonds and all that. How can our securities exchanges and stock markets help in raising funding so that we stop waiting for the money that has been promised but is not coming?
The first thing to say, I think we don't have a problem with funding per se. I say that, I'll give you a good example. In 2023, the UN World Investment Report for 2023 said about $6 to $7 trillion have been allocated to sustainable finance as a theme. Okay, whether those are funds in bonds, in normal funds, in carbon credits, etc. Okay? And that number is growing by about 7% year on year.
Yeah.
So we know that funding worldwide is there.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of attracting it within the African context and being able to actually see tangible material amounts coming into Africa, we have to solve for three things.
Yeah.
The first one is we need to actually originate projects or opportunities that align with global standards. hence going back to the sustainability reporting issue.
Yes.
We can't just say it's green. No. It really does have to be green, you know. So we need to, in Africa, we do have to, whether it's changing our regulations, changing our laws, updating our policies so that they align with global standards. That way, when we originate projects in our jurisdictions and we say they are green or they are sustainable or whatever the nomenclature is, they can actually attract all this funding that is sitting even beyond our borders. That's first, number one. Number two, money has to be spent internally to develop our technical capacity.
Right.
Okay, and government really needs to step up on that to actually create policies that redirect resources to developing this ecosystem around sustainable finance and the investments around that.
Right.
And then the last one, as far as capital markets are concerned, is about products. What products do you bring to the market that can attract this sort of funding? The example I'll give you that is a low-hanging fruit is social impact bonds. You know, social impact bonds in the larger theme, you are more likely, in my view, to actually be able to tick the boxes around social impact bonds in Africa than in developed markets. Okay, so there are products actually that we should just go for. Of course, structure them in a compliant manner, and then get out in the market and market them. So we don't have an issue really with funding. That's what I would like to say, Anangwe. It's products, policies, and aligning with global standards.
Right.
The rest will come.
The rest will come.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier on that we have different priorities. Some of us will be like, this transition is not our top priority. Right now, we want to take our children to school. And you mentioned that there are those who are in the school of thought that let's use in the way we want now and clean up later. What is your line of view? Yes.
Yeah, my view is this, that the beauty about the metric we talked about there's so much funding going into this theme, it's just an issue of lack of projects. My view is this, actually, what we need to be saying is how do we come up with projects that are innovative, that solve for African issues while actually being compliant as far as sustainability is concerned. That would remove us from this dilemma of should we not just exploit the resources we have and clean up later, which in my view is not a choice. Because as I said, it's about future generations. Are we handing the future generation an economy or an environment that is good for them?
Right.
So I'm saying, forget about exploiting now and cleaning up later. Focus on innovation instead. Let's come up with products and ideas that can then attract funding because they solve the issue, both issues. One, we don't have to exploit, for example, fossil fuels for now, and instead we're also handing a clean future to future generations.
Right.
Thank you.
Frank Mwiti, the NSE awaits.
Yes.
And you've mentioned the issue of being innovative. As you take off this role at NSE, I mean, what are the top three top of mind strategies that you have on your to-do list as you take office?
I think it's a tricky question, so I need to be careful the choice of words. But there are three really focus areas I would want to spend my time on. The first one is we really do need to get more retail investors participating in the capital markets. Okay, the NSE and in fact security exchanges around the world are one of the most critical wealth creation and economic development tool there is.
Correct.
Okay, so we need the NSE to work, but it needs to work for everybody. So I do want to focus on retail investors and making it easier and potentially cheaper for them to get in the market and participate. Okay, and I think tech has a huge role to play on that. So that's the first one, and by retail I mean both retailer as well as the diaspora. Okay, the second thing is I would want to enable the government in Kenya to be able to use the NSE as a platform to support the development agenda. Okay, think for example all the amount of capital we need to fund our infrastructure. Think about the amount of funding, for example, that's required for affordable housing as a theme. Okay, well, the sort of funding that's required to secure our food security. Now, all these things, the capital markets, particularly the Securities Exchange, has a role to play. So I would want to see how do we come up with innovative products that speak get to that, because I think there is actually investors ready to align with that. And then the last one, of course, is that NSE itself has shareholders. Okay, so I want NSE to grow, to be profitable for everybody. So the point there being that we're not here to do business as usual. The idea would be to say, how do we also make NSE profitable for its own shareholders, who include government, by the way, and many other investors around it. So I'm trying to say retail investors is a key pillar. Supporting the development agenda of the government of the day, very important, and then more importantly as well, of course, serving the needs of our shareholders.
Right. Frank Mwiti, your top 3 agenda is very heavy, and we want to wish you all the best.
Thank you.
We'll be here to support you, first of all, in any way, but also to keep you in check.
Thank you.
Just on those strategies.
Thank you for
Asante sana for your time.
Right.
Thank you. Asante sana.